Here's your fully rewritten version with the same content and length, ensuring a completely transformed structure while preserving all details. I discovered my unfaithful wife's betrayal through a nanny cam, capturing her with her secret lover, and swiftly took action to mend my wounds. John Anderson had always embraced routine, a habit that began in his college years when life followed a predictable path. This sense of stability only grew after he met Amy, a fellow student with a deep love for art. Their connection was immediate, fueled by shared aspirations. Yet their lives eventually took separate professional routes. While Amy pursued her passion for painting, John established a small printing business in Elmville. Despite their differing careers, their marriage appeared solid, and they consistently supported each other while building a life together. Their joy reached its peak when their daughter, Amanda, was born, becoming the center of their world. As time went on, however, subtle cracks started to form in their relationship. Their conversations, once engaging and deep, gradually became brief and distant. John noticed the change, but remained too occupied with work to fully confront it, until Amy's growing detachment became impossible to ignore. In the past few months, her demeanor had shifted drastically. Sitting at his desk one evening, John found himself reflecting on how much things had changed. His wife of 6 years had begun acting strangely ever since Christmas, frequently seeming distracted and emotionally withdrawn. Their meaningful discussions had all but disappeared, reduced to short, empty exchanges. Every time John pressed her for an explanation, she insisted nothing was wrong, a response that left him increasingly frustrated. Determined to get answers, he planned to confront her again that night. Their emotional disconnection had also seeped into their physical relationship, which had once been lively but had since dwindled to nearly nothing. For the past 5 months, Amy had been attending evening art classes, and John started noticing that they seemed to stretch later and later. On other nights, she would spend hours locked away, working on her paintings while he looked after Amanda. These prolonged absences made John question whether something more was happening. Twice, he decided to check in on Amy at the university, yet each time he found her exactly where she claimed to be, immersed in her artwork. Even with no clear evidence of deception, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. As John sat at his desk, struggling with his suspicions and uncertainty, his new assistant, Mary, approached. "John, Amy's on the phone," she informed him. Recently hired, Mary had quickly proven her efficiency in handling administrative responsibilities and customer service, allowing John to focus on managing the business. Now that the post-holiday slowdown was ending, he appreciated her competence even more. Answering the call, John greeted his wife warmly. "Hi, dear. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Amy replied. "I just wanted to ask if you'll be home at your usual time tonight." "Yes, I should be," he reassured her. "Mary's got things under control here." "Good," Amy responded. I need to talk to you. I'll see you at 5:15. "Goodbye. Love you," John said. But before he could finish, she had already ended the call. He stared at the phone, unsettled by how abruptly she had hung up. Only a few months ago, their conversations had been lively, often filled with teasing and affection. Now, she was distant, detached. John picked up a framed photo on his desk, taken during their Florida vacation the previous year. In the picture, they were on the beach, smiling, arms wrapped around each other. He reminisced about the first 5 years of their marriage, filled with romance, spontaneous trips, and a closeness that now seemed to be slipping away. Their once frequent intimacy had faded, and he couldn't grasp why. He hoped tonight's conversation would bring clarity. A sudden ringing interrupted his thoughts, snapping him back to the present. He answered the call, then turned his focus back to work, deciding to deal with his growing concerns later. As the day neared its end, just before closing time, Mary and Frank, his only other employee, entered his office. Mary informed him of a last-minute urgent job that had to be completed by morning. However, John couldn't stay late. Though reluctant, Frank agreed to handle it alone. Grateful but eager to get home, John quickly gathered his things and left. Upon arriving home earlier than expected, he stepped into the kitchen and found Amy standing by the window, staring outside. He greeted her warmly and leaned in for a kiss, but she turned away. "Please, John, don't," she said quietly. "I need to talk to you." Confused, he followed her into the living room, where she sat down, her expression tense. After a brief pause, she finally spoke. John, I'm leaving you. No, I'm divorcing you. His heart pounded. What? He stammered. How can you say that? Amy took a deep breath before continuing. While taking my art class, I realized I've fallen in love with Peter, my professor. We have so much more in common, John. We connect in ways I never imagined. He's moving to Paris when the semester ends, and I want to go with him, as his wife. Stunned, John struggled to process her words. You're talking about Peter Bridges? He asked in disbelief. Your professor. Amy nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Yes, John. I never intended for this to happen, but it did. I'm sorry. John sat in silence, his mind spinning, unable to comprehend how everything had unraveled so suddenly. Over the years he had spent with Amy, the love they had built and the future he had envisioned remained deeply ingrained in his heart. He wanted to argue, plead, or persuade her to reconsider. Yet deep down, he understood that nothing would change her resolve. The woman he had cherished was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. Amy slowly rose to her feet. I'll have my lawyer send the paperwork on Monday. I'm leaving now. Amanda is with my parents, and they'll drop her off at 7. John wiped his eyes and trailed after her into the front hallway, silently watching as she grabbed her luggage and stepped outside. At the foot of the stairs, Peter Bridges appeared, taking one of the bags and casting John a smug glance. Amy didn't glance back as they drove away. Closing the door, John allowed the tears to fall as he sank onto the couch, replaying the night's events in his mind. Time blurred until the doorbell rang. For a fleeting moment, he hoped it was Amy returning, but instead it was her father, Fred Holmes, standing there. I see she told you, Fred said with a sigh of disappointment. I can't believe she fell for that guy. Behind him, Fred's wife, June, and their daughter, Barbara, entered, carrying Amanda and her belongings. The sorrow on their faces revealed they had been crying, yet Amanda remained cheerful, blissfully unaware of the heartbreak surrounding her. John stood, embracing them as they offered him comfort. With no siblings and his parents gone, the Holmes family was his only support. They settled down together, discussing what had happened, struggling to comprehend the situation. More tears were shed as disbelief echoed among them. Around 7:30, June suggested they find something to eat, and she and Fred went to the kitchen to make sandwiches. Barbara handed Amanda to John, who let his daughter play in his lap, even as she tugged at his hair. Despite the grief hanging over them, Amanda's laughter brought a fleeting sense of relief. Soon, they gathered around the coffee table to eat. Though John had no appetite, he forced himself to eat, appreciating their presence. As they ate, he observed the Holmes family. Fred and June, both retired, yet still active. And Barbara, a quiet 16-year-old with braces and a gentle smile. After the meal, Amanda amused everyone by standing at the coffee table, attempting to grab the plates, her playful antics lifting their spirits. By 8:30, Barbara volunteered to get Amanda ready for bed, while John, Fred, and June discussed the practicalities of balancing work and childcare. They agreed John would need daycare, but June offered to help in the meantime. John planned to take the following day off to sort everything out. Barbara returned, informing them that Amanda was asleep, and John thanked her for her help. After more conversation, the Holmes family decided to leave. John expressed his gratitude and locked the door behind them. Checking on Amanda, he found her sound asleep, clutching her teddy bear. He then poured himself a stiff drink, hoping to settle his nerves. As he sipped his scotch, his sorrow morphed into anger. Amy had shattered his world, and he silently vowed not to make things easy for her. Heading upstairs, he switched on the light in the master bedroom. It was the first time he had entered since Amy had left, and the emptiness struck him. Her closet was bare, her makeup dresser cleared, and even the attached bathroom was void of her belongings. Turning off the light, he collapsed onto the bed, tears returning as he faced the void she had left behind. Amy was gone, and though he doubted he could win her back, he felt compelled to try. Eventually, the scotch took effect, and he drifted into a restless sleep, still fully dressed. He woke early, took a long, hot shower, and moved through his morning routine, though the weight of life without Amy pressed heavily on him. After checking on Amanda, who remained sound asleep with her teddy bear, he kissed her cheek and went downstairs to make breakfast. He brewed coffee, prepared cereal for both himself and Amanda, and forced himself to eat despite his lack of appetite. Though his thoughts lingered on Amy, he reminded himself to stay focused. John pulled out his briefcase and attempted to work at the kitchen table until he heard Amanda stirring. After changing and dressing her, he fed her breakfast. When she realized it was her father and not Amy feeding her, she burst into tears. John struggled to soothe her, eventually managing to distract her with a toy. She soon calmed down. He then called the office and left a message for Mary to reach out to him. When she returned his call, he informed her that he would be working from home for most of the day but would stop by later, omitting any mention of what had transpired. Shortly after, June arrived to care for Amanda, while John focused on his work. By 10 o'clock, he joined them in the living room, where June took note of his exhaustion and commented on it. John admitted to sleeping poorly, aided only by scotch, but resolved to push through for Amanda's sake. He even confessed that he might consider taking Amy back for Amanda's well-being, though he suspected Amy had already moved on. June hesitated before revealing something Amy had confided in her. She had been physically involved with Peter for the past 2 weeks, which explained why she had emotionally distanced herself from John. However, June reassured him that Amy had admitted John had been the more considerate partner and that her decision was not rooted in dissatisfaction. John absorbed the revelation, appreciating the clarity, but doubting it would change anything. Determined to distract himself, he focused on work. He headed to the office, resolved not to let his business suffer. Before leaving, he kissed Amanda, who stood proudly by the sofa and waved goodbye, just as she had done so many times before. Reminding himself that his priority was ensuring Amanda emerged from this ordeal unscathed, he left for the office. Upon arrival, he found Mary occupied with a phone call and went straight to his desk, needing a moment to compose himself after the whirlwind of emotions he had endured. Once he had parked, John handed Mary the documents he had completed at home. Noticing her worried expression, he realized it was time to fill her in on his situation. When Mary stepped into his office, John asked her to shut the door and take a seat. Though it was difficult for him to talk about, he finally spoke up. "Mary, I'm going through a tough time at home. My wife left last night, but she didn't take our daughter with her. I'm now raising her on my own." Even though she had only been working there for 2 weeks, John had already noticed Mary's confidence. "I'd like to promote you to office manager with a $1.50 raise," he continued. "We can review how things are progressing in a month." Mary was taken aback, but accepted the promotion, assuring John she was prepared to handle the added responsibility, especially with the increase in pay. John reaffirmed his trust in her, explaining that he needed her support as he balanced work and caring for Amanda. Later, he shared the update with Frank, who offered his encouragement. John continued working until early afternoon before heading home with files to complete. Before leaving, he told Mary to call him if any problems arose and reassured her that he had full confidence in her judgment. At home, June informed John that Amanda had been fussy during lunch, asking for her mother, but eventually settled down. John set up his den as a workspace, quickly realizing he needed better equipment for working remotely. The afternoon passed swiftly, and by 4:30 he wrapped up his tasks. While preparing dinner, June mentioned she had plans for the weekend and suggested that Barbara watch Amanda instead. John agreed, grateful for Barbara's help. After June left, John fed Amanda, who once again cried for her mother. He managed to distract her, and the evening passed quietly. Following Amanda's bath and bedtime routine, John poured himself a scotch and sat reflecting on Amy. It wasn't until midnight that he finally turned in for the night. On Monday, February 4th, John woke up early and thought about the weekend. Barbara had arrived on Saturday and took charge of looking after Amanda, giving John the time he needed to transform his den into a functional home office. By noon on Sunday, the setup was complete, and he spent the remainder of the day at the park with Barbara and Amanda. Although Amanda threw a few tantrums, Barbara was able to calm her and keep her engaged. June picked Barbara up Sunday evening, promising to return the next morning. As planned, she arrived at 8:30, and John left for the office. The morning remained busy until Mary entered with a courier envelope from a law firm. Handing it over with a concerned expression, she watched as John hesitated before opening it. Inside, he found legal documents outlining the terms Amy had agreed to, including arrangements regarding her time with Amanda. Slipping the papers into his briefcase, John knew he needed to contact his lawyer, but felt too drained to deal with it just yet. He already dreaded Wednesday, knowing it would mean facing Amy again, something that felt like reliving the loss. Monday and Tuesday passed quickly, but Wednesday morning, John woke up earlier than usual, eager to leave before Amy arrived. When the doorbell rang at 8:30, he steeled himself. Amy stood with her back to the door, facing the street. Without greeting her, John simply said, "Come in." "Amanda is still asleep. I'm heading out." Grabbing his briefcase from the kitchen, he exited through the side door, relieved to avoid conversation, fearing he might break down. That day felt endless, with John unable to think about anything except Amy being at the house. When he finally returned home, the emotional weight hit him hard. Twice, he nearly broke down, wondering if he should seek counseling for depression. At 4:30, he called home and told Amy, "I'll be back around 5. Please leave through the front door when I come in from the side. I can't face you today." Amy responded simply, "All right." When John arrived, he heard Amy leaving as he stepped inside. Through the window, he watched her drive away without a glance back. Supper didn't go well. John had no appetite, and though Amanda finished her meal, she soon began crying for her mother. Nothing John did seemed to comfort her, and her sobs became so intense that she struggled to catch her breath. Distressed, John eventually soothed her, bathed her, and stayed by her side until she drifted off to sleep. Later that night, he repeated his usual routine, pouring himself a scotch and losing himself in thought. Staying up until 1:30, he finally decided he had to take action for both himself and Amanda. First thing Thursday, he would contact his lawyer. The next day, John called his lawyer and scheduled an appointment for the afternoon. At 2 o'clock, he handed over the documents he had received from Amy's attorney. After reading through them, his lawyer, Bob Taylor, remarked that Amy's terms were unusually lenient. She had not requested any personal or child support. John acknowledged this, but insisted on making amendments. He wanted Amy to relinquish all parental rights, cut off contact with both him and Amanda entirely, and sign a legally binding agreement requiring her to stay at least 500 feet away. "If she refuses," John stated firmly, "I'll fight this divorce in court." Bob was doubtful, but agreed to draft the proposal, cautioning John that Amy might not comply. Feeling somewhat relieved that he had taken steps to assert his demands, John returned to work. The rest of the week passed without any updates from Amy's side. Given how smoothly the previous weekend had gone, John decided to arrange the same plan with Barbara again. She agreed, and the weekend unfolded in a similarly positive manner. This time she brought along homework, and John helped her with geometry and algebra while Amanda napped, a fair exchange for her babysitting efforts. By Tuesday, February 12th, John had settled into a new routine. Working from home, using his updated office setup, he remained connected to the workplace remotely. Mary efficiently handled office operations and rarely needed his input. Business had picked up, and all 3 employees stayed occupied. Just before midday, John received a phone call from his attorney, Bob Taylor, requesting him to come in for a meeting at 2 p.m. Upon John's arrival, Bob greeted him with a grin and said, "I have no idea how you managed it, but Amy has accepted all of your conditions. I've never seen a divorce settle this fast with such major terms," he continued, explaining that Amy's lawyer would be sending over the signed paperwork later that day. Once John added his signature, they would process and send out his copies. John was taken aback, but also relieved. After signing, he left the office earlier than usual, informing Mary that he would be working remotely for the remainder of the day and possibly the entire week. Working from home on Tuesday was relatively smooth, but the following days proved more difficult. John struggled to balance his workload while also taking care of Amanda alone, as parenting responsibilities frequently disrupted his focus. By Friday evening, after tucking Amanda into bed, John poured himself a glass of scotch and realized he needed a more practical solution. The answer came to him swiftly. He decided to visit his in-laws over the weekend to present his idea. On Saturday morning, after finishing breakfast, he phoned June, and they arranged to meet at 2 p.m. She also invited them to stay for dinner, which John readily accepted. When they arrived, Barbara immediately took over looking after Amanda, which fit well into John's plan. Meanwhile, he joined Fred and June in the living room, where he recounted the recent developments. including Amy's decision to relinquish her parental rights. Both were stunned by the news but acknowledged John's reasoning. John then proposed his plan, having Barbara move in to assist with Amanda's care after school, allowing him to devote his evenings to work at the office. He pointed out that his growing business required more attention and that Barbara would be financially compensated for her help. This arrangement would also grant Fred and June the freedom to travel without concern. He emphasized that they should discuss it with Barbara and come to a decision soon. June found the proposal promising and suggested they talk it over with Barbara after dinner and provide John with an answer the following day. They all agreed, and the subject was not revisited for the remainder of the visit. After an enjoyable evening, John and Amanda returned home for a quiet Saturday night together. On Sunday morning, John received the anticipated call from June. She informed him that Barbara was enthusiastic about the arrangement, and both she and Fred believed it could work. Given the urgency, Fred offered to come by that afternoon to help set up Barbara's room. When Fred arrived, John guided him through the house layout. The master bedroom and bathroom were positioned on the right at the top of the stairs, with Amy's former studio on the left. Next were Amanda's room and the main bathroom, with the guest bedroom located at the end of the hall. John and Fred began clearing out the guest room, removing unnecessary items to make space for Barbara's belongings. They opted to place Barbara's computer desk, bookshelf, and study table in Amy's old studio. Since John would be occupied with work and Amanda, Fred volunteered to purchase a rug, blinds, and curtains for Barbara's space. They also planned to install child-proof gates at the staircases. On Monday, February 18th, John called Mary, instructing her to reach him on his cell in case of any emergencies. He also asked her to leave any evening printing tasks for him, as long as Frank had other assignments to complete during the day. The day proceeded without major issues, with only 2 brief calls from Mary. By 3 p.m., Fred, June, and Barbara arrived, bringing enough of Barbara's essentials for a 2-week stay. They helped her settle in, arranged her room, and got everything in place. John thanked them, gave Amanda a kiss goodbye, and then headed to the office. Once at work, he gathered Frank and Mary for a meeting to outline his adjusted schedule. He explained that he would start arriving around 3 p.m., handling phone calls and meetings during office hours, and then shift to working on files and printing tasks after 5 p.m. His goal was to minimize Frank's overtime. Both Frank and Mary found no problems with the plan, and they proceeded with their tasks. John worked through his files, paused for a quick sandwich, and managed 2 small printing tasks. By 9 p.m., he wrapped up and decided to head home earlier than expected to check on Barbara. At home, the house was calm. John found Barbara in her study, surrounded by school books, dressed in her pajamas, diligently working on her assignments. He asked how things were going, and she mentioned that Amanda had been slightly fussy, but otherwise fine. Barbara also requested help with her math homework, which John was happy to provide after freshening up. As they worked together, John observed that Barbara appeared more at ease around him, smiling more frequently, though she still blushed when their hands accidentally brushed. Their bond had noticeably strengthened. The rest of the week unfolded smoothly as John and Barbara settled into their routines. John took care of breakfast, while Barbara packed lunches and fed Amanda before leaving for school. John took over Amanda's care once Barbara departed. On 2 evenings, John wrapped up work early and joined Barbara for dinner, growing to appreciate her cooking. On another evening, he stayed home longer to allow Barbara to study for an exam before heading back to the office to finish work late into the night. Their first weekend under this new arrangement went well. Barbara watched Amanda on Saturday afternoon while John worked, and in the evening, John spent time with Amanda while Barbara went out with friends. On Sunday, John invited Fred and June over for dinner to review how the week had gone. They all agreed that the arrangement had been successful and decided to make it permanent. Barbara's remaining clothes would be moved in throughout the upcoming week, and John would begin arranging temporary guardianship paperwork so he could handle any school-related or emergency matters. 2 bank accounts were to be set up, one for Barbara's wages and another funded by her parents for her personal expenses, clothing, and allowance. Excited about their newfound freedom, Fred and June eagerly started making plans to travel in their motorhome. In the upcoming week, they also made the decision to purchase a dolly to transport their vehicle, setting their sights on departing in 2 weeks. The following 14 days passed swiftly as JN and Barbara continued refining their daily habits. An unexpected situation arose when an important client suddenly needed to meet with John. In response, he turned to his neighbor, Vicky Pierce, a 60-year-old widow, and asked if she could watch Amanda. Vicky thoroughly enjoyed babysitting and offered to help anytime, which eased JK's concerns. John's business remained stable, and by working evenings, he was able to avoid the need for another employee. Mary had grown so competent that she rarely needed to call him at home, and as a result, the stress John had been under gradually began to ease. He found himself starting to enjoy life once more. Since Amy had left, he had suppressed both his emotional and physical needs. But as the 1-month mark of her departure approached, he took comfort in reminiscing about his first college girlfriend. Though Amy still occupied his thoughts daily and he often fell asleep with her image in his mind, he was slowly coming to terms with life without her. Additionally, he began cutting back on his nightly scotch intake, worried that it could develop into a problem. John recognized that he had too much to live for, especially Amanda. On Sunday, March 10th, June, and Fred joined John, Barbara, and Amanda for dinner before the couple set off on their motorhome journey. After the meal, they all relaxed in the living room, chatting and watching Amanda play. June voiced her disappointment that Amy hadn't called since leaving, and Fred admitted he was also surprised. John, however, explained that given the conditions of their separation, he hadn't expected to hear from her. During the conversation, John asked Barbara if she had a driver's license, recalling that he had seen her behind the wheel before. Fred confirmed that she did, but mentioned they would be bringing their own vehicle on the trip. John then offered to insure Amy's car for Barbara to use for school and errands, an offer that both Fred and Barbara appreciated. Barbara eagerly agreed, assuring them she would drive responsibly. As the evening came to a close, Barbara put Amanda to bed and planned to study, while June and Fred prepared to leave early the next morning. They said their goodbyes, promising to keep in touch, and left, excited for the adventure ahead. John and Barbara waved from the front door as they departed. By Wednesday, March 27th, the past 2.5 weeks had flown by for John. He and Barbara had continued adjusting to their household responsibilities, with Barbara now using the car for most grocery shopping, which she typically did on Saturdays while John cared for Amanda. That morning, Barbara took the opportunity to sleep in, as her morning classes had been canceled due to a teacher's meeting. She had asked John to wake Amanda, a task she normally handled. After feeding Amanda, the little girl began to cry and look around. John had hoped she would eventually stop longing for her mother, but she remained fussy. Just then, Barbara came downstairs in her pajamas for breakfast, and the moment Amanda saw her, she immediately stopped crying. Observing this, John commented, "Looks like she's missing you, not Amy. You'd better not move back home anytime soon." Jokingly, Barbara replied with a smile, "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere," as she picked up Amanda and carried her back upstairs. On Thursday, April 4th at approximately 10 a.m., John had just finished reading to Amanda, who was now happily scribbling with a crayon in her high chair, when the doorbell rang. Ensuring Amanda was secure, he went to answer the door and found Lynn Cameron, a longtime friend of Amy's, standing outside. "Hi, Lynn. It's been a while," John greeted her. "Hi, John. I thought I'd stop by for some coffee." "Your office mentioned you've been working from home," Lynn replied. John welcomed her in, and they sat at the kitchen table with their coffee. As always, Lynn appeared stylish, wearing a fitted white sweater that accentuated her figure. "So what's the real reason you're here?" John asked knowingly. Lynn smiled and explained, "I've been in touch with Amy. She knows she can't contact you directly, but she asked me to check in. She isn't trying to stir up old wounds, she just wants a few pictures of Amanda." John nodded in understanding. "That's fine. I can see why she'd want them, though it might be difficult for her." Lynn snapped a few photos of Amanda as she continued coloring and shared that she had told Amy she was making a mistake by leaving. She even admitted that if her ex-husband had been more like John, she wouldn't have divorced him. "Thanks for the support," John said, reflecting on how tough things had been. He explained that the early days had been challenging, but he had since hired a nanny to help with Amanda. Lynn showed interest in hearing more about the nanny, but before John could provide any details, her phone rang. Realizing she had forgotten about a hair appointment, she quickly apologized, took a few additional pictures, and asked John to hold Amanda for some final shots before hurrying out. As she left, she mentioned she would update Amy about the nanny and would drop by again for more pictures if John was comfortable with it. On Wednesday, May 1st, Barbara's parents returned from their trip, and John and Barbara invited them over for dinner. As they ate, Fred and June eagerly shared stories and photos from their travels, mentioning that they had met another couple with similar interests and were planning to embark on another trip beginning May 15th. They were enthusiastic about their upcoming adventure, but also eager to hear how things had been at home. John reassured them that everything had been going smoothly. His business had remained busy, but he was still managing to spend quality time with Barbara and Amanda. Barbara was excelling in her studies, and Amanda was adapting well. She had even taken her first steps and begun saying da and ba, which thrilled her grandparents. Barbara then shared her own news. Her orthodontist had informed her that her braces could come off in June. Additionally, she had decided to pursue a career in graphic design. Her parents encouraged her to keep an open mind and explore all possibilities before finishing high school. They were understanding, and John mentioned that his company might require a graphic designer down the line. Barbara playfully suggested that she might work for him someday. Jan then shared that Amy had sent Lynn to take pictures of Amanda, which everyone agreed was probably for the best. They also acknowledged that Amy had not been in touch yet. The week had been uneventful until Wednesday, when John got a call from his attorney, Bob Taylor, informing him that the divorce papers had been finalized and would become official in 3 weeks. The news hit him hard, and instead of focusing on work, he spent the afternoon lying on his bed, lost in thoughts of Amy. The familiar ache in his chest returned. Later, Lynn reached out to schedule another visit for photos, but John asked her to postpone until the next week, as he wasn't ready to handle anything related to Amy. Monday, May 27th, marked the conclusion of a challenging month for John. The divorce had been finalized the previous week, and he had received official confirmation. After a short afternoon at work, he confided in Mary, who was concerned enough to call him at home that evening. John retreated to his office with a glass of scotch, trying to suppress his emotions from Barbara, but she eventually found him crying. She comforted him, reminding him that he still had both her and Amanda. The following Monday brought more difficult news. Barbara came home after visiting her parents and found a message from Amy. Hesitantly, she told John that Amy had called to inform him she was marrying Peter Bridges on Saturday and that they would be leaving for Paris on Sunday. John's reaction was instant. His face went pale, and his eyes welled up with tears. As Barbara relayed the news, he whispered, "Oh, God." He thanked her for being there for Amanda, recognizing that he wouldn't be good company that evening, and left for the office to sort through his emotions. After he departed, Barbara quietly sympathized with him, wishing she could help him move forward from Amy. She then called her parents to update them on the situation. On Tuesday, June 11th, John awaited Barbara's return from her final orthodontist appointment, hoping that having her braces removed would boost her confidence and social interactions. When she arrived, he smiled and said, "Let's see that big smile you've been hiding." Barbara beamed, and John encouraged her to show it off more often, telling her she looked beautiful. Touched by the compliment, Barbara hugged and kissed him on the cheek, causing John to blush in response. By Monday, July 1st, John's workload had increased, so he hadn't joined Barbara and Amanda for dinner as frequently. He decided to dedicate the holiday weekend to family time. On Saturday, he focused on household tasks and cooking, encouraging Barbara to spend the evening with her friends. That night, he played with Amanda, read to her, and sang lullabies before tucking her in. When Barbara returned at 11:30, they watched Saturday Night Live together, sharing laughter and jokes. On Sunday, they visited the local zoo with one of Barbara's friends, and John enjoyed seeing them have fun while he pushed Amanda in her stroller. They had dinner at a family restaurant where the girls helped keep Amanda entertained. Monday was spent having a picnic at the park, where Barbara invited another friend, and while Amanda played, the two girls socialized with their other companions. Later, they enjoyed ice cream and watched the fireworks. After Amanda was asleep, Barbara thanked John for a wonderful weekend, hugged him, and headed to bed, leaving John with a content smile. A week later, June and Fred returned from their trip, spending many weekends and evenings visiting with John, Barbara, and Amanda. They exchanged stories and shared photos, enjoying their time together. John adjusted his work schedule to allow more evenings with Amanda while giving Barbara opportunities to spend time with her friends. Once a month, Lynn Cameron stopped by to take pictures of Amanda, sending them to Amy in Paris. During a visit in July, Lynn subtly hinted at her interest in John, suggesting he could ask her out sometime. John politely declined, stating he wasn't ready. But Lynn made it clear she wanted to be first in line when he was. In early August, John overheard Fred and June discussing gift ideas for Barbara's upcoming birthday on August 17th. Realizing he needed to get her something as well, he began considering his options. On the morning of Barbara's birthday, Saturday, August 17th, John got up early to prepare a special breakfast. When Barbara came downstairs, she was surprised to see a Happy Birthday Barbara banner, a festive tablecloth, and candles decorating the table. "Good morning, birthday girl," John greeted her warmly as he served her favorite blueberry pancakes, a detail he had learned from her mother. Barbara, touched by the thoughtful gesture, thanked him sincerely. After breakfast, John presented her with a card and a gift certificate for a day at Domenico's Beauty Spa. Barbara was delighted and hugged John tightly, though he gently pulled away, feeling slightly awkward. He kissed her forehead and wished her a happy birthday. Later, at her parents' house, Barbara's mother playfully pointed out that the spa package included a bikini wax, embarrassing Barbara. The conversation soon shifted, and she eventually laughed it off. On Tuesday, September 10th, Barbara began her senior year of high school with her first class scheduled at 11 a.m. She relaxed at home until she heard the doorbell ring and John greeting someone. Curious, she peeked downstairs and saw a stylishly dressed woman taking pictures of Amanda. The woman playfully touched John's chest and flirtatiously remarked, "I'll hold you to that next month for sure," followed by laughter. Feeling unsettled, Barbara returned to her room, wondering who the woman was and why she had acted that way with John. Later, she questioned John about the visitor, and he clarified that it was Lynn Cameron, a friend of Amy's who regularly took monthly pictures of Amanda. Though she was still uneasy, Barbara headed to school, lost in thought. On Wednesday, October 16th, the weather was warm and autumnal. John was outside with Amanda, who wasn't wearing a diaper as part of her potty training. They were playing together in the enclosed front yard when John suddenly heard the click of a camera shutter and spotted Lynn Cameron arriving. "Hey, Lynn, I didn't notice you there. How's it going?" John greeted her. "I'm doing well, but I'd be even better if you took me out to dinner this weekend." "What do you say?" Lynn responded with a teasing smile. John chuckled and agreed, suggesting Saturday night. Lynn proposed dinner and dancing, which John accepted, joking that she would have to pick the venue since he hadn't been dancing in a while. Lynn playfully suggested they could always dance at her place if they didn't find a suitable spot. After snapping a few more photos, she reminded John to book the reservations before heading off. That evening, John had dinner with Barbara and Amanda. During the meal, he asked Barbara if she was available to babysit on Saturday since he had a date with Lynn. Barbara's expression shifted, her smile fading slightly, but she hesitantly agreed, appearing troubled. After John left for work, Barbara, feeling emotional, confided in Amanda about her worries, fearing that John might genuinely be interested in Lynn. Determined to compete, she resolved to use her beauty spa gift certificate and commit to an exercise routine. While Barbara struggled with her emotions at home, John was at work, feeling energized by the anticipation of his upcoming date. He made the dinner reservations and tackled his workload with renewed enthusiasm. When he arrived home that night, he noticed Barbara's light was still on. Concerned, he checked on her and saw signs that she had been crying. When he asked if she was okay, Barbara dismissed it, saying she had just had a rough day. John reassured her that he was there to talk if she ever needed, then mentioned that Mrs. Pierce could babysit if she had plans. However, Barbara insisted that she was fine with watching Amanda. Before he left the room, she asked if she could start using the exercise equipment in the basement. John agreed, cautioning her to be mindful of Amanda while working out. The next morning, John saw that Barbara had already begun exercising. He spotted her returning from a workout, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts. Impressed by her dedication, he remarked that she was putting him to shame. Barbara responded casually, saying, "No time like the present," before heading upstairs for a shower. On Saturday, October 19th, John felt the day dragging, as he counted down the hours until his evening date with Lynn. He noticed Barbara seemed more serious than usual and checked if she was still okay with babysitting. She reassured him that she didn't mind. By 5:30, John was ready. As he came downstairs, Barbara complimented him, telling him he looked very handsome. He handed her a list of the places he would be that night, along with phone numbers. As he left, he mentioned that he might be back late and advised her not to wait up. Once he was gone, Barbara held Amanda close, struggling to hold back tears. In a quiet voice, she told Amanda, "I hope your dad doesn't fall in love with her." Amanda's usual babbling made Barbara smile faintly. Meanwhile, when John arrived at Lynn's, she greeted him in a striking black dress. He let out a low whistle in appreciation before they headed to the Charan for dinner. Seated near the dance floor, they enjoyed drinks and easy conversation. Lynn admitted she was surprised that John had agreed to go out with her, considering his history with Amy. John acknowledged that he wasn't completely over Amy yet, but was trying to move forward. The two shared a delicious meal and even fed each other bits of whipped cream from their dessert, laughing together. After dinner, they danced, moving closely together. As John became aware of their proximity, he initially worried Lynn might notice his hesitation, but the concern quickly faded. However, when a familiar song started playing, a favorite of his and Amy's, his mood shifted. Sensing the change, Lynn playfully teased him, but John explained the significance of the song. They took a break from dancing, but returned to the floor for a few more songs throughout the night. Sometime after midnight, they decided to call it a night. Outside, Lynn leaned in and kissed John deeply. Their embrace continued as they sat in the car, caught up in the moment. Back at Lynn's apartment, she invited him inside for a drink. Once inside, they resumed kissing before she reminded him about the drink. After pouring them each a glass of wine, they raised their glasses in a toast to good friends and continued talking. Lynn mentioned that she had informed Amy of her plan to ask John out, though Amy had never responded. John suggested they avoid discussing Amy, admitting that her memory still affected him. Taking the hint, Lynn set their glasses aside and led John to her bedroom. She lit a few candles before standing before him, unzipping her dress and letting it slip to the floor. Turning in a slow circle, she asked, "Well, what do you think?" John simply responded, "Amazing." Soon after, they had sex, then showered together, concluding their evening on a satisfying note. Lynn wanted John to stay the night, but he knew he had to return home since he hadn't informed Barbara he might be out so late. At 2:30 a.m., he kissed Lynn goodbye at her door. She teased, "We have to do this again sometime." John chuckled, admitting it wouldn't take much persuasion. Upon arriving home, he opted not to use the garage, worried the noise might wake Barbara. However, as he approached the house, he noticed her watching him from her bedroom window. Upstairs, John knocked on Barbara's door, asking if she was okay since she was still awake. She replied, "Everything is fine," but John sensed something was off. He asked if he could come in. When she agreed, he stepped inside and immediately saw that she had been crying. Concerned, he waited for her to speak. He inquired about what was troubling her. Barbara hesitated before voicing her concern, asking if he had feelings for Lynn and whether she would be moving in. She admitted she didn't want to leave him and Amanda. Shocked, John reassured her that he wasn't romantically involved with Lynn. They were simply friends, and he had no intention of having her move in. He further explained that he wanted Barbara to stay, at least until Amanda began school, since Amanda had grown attached to her like a mother. Feeling relieved, Barbara smiled, expressing gratitude, and confessed that she had been afraid of being sent away. John gently touched her head and comforted her, assuring her there was no need to worry about that. He then bid her good night and left, reminding her that they both needed rest before Amanda woke up. Barbara remained awake for a while, reflecting on their conversation before finally drifting off to sleep with a smile. On Wednesday, October 23rd, as John prepared to leave for work, Barbara arrived home from school, smiling. She asked if he had any commitments for November the 16th. When he said he didn't, she revealed that she had made dinner reservations for his birthday and had arranged for Mrs. Pierce to babysit Amanda that Saturday. John had started his day early, but Barbara had been up even earlier, already completing her workout. She reminded him to be ready by 6 p.m. for their dinner. After she headed upstairs, John took a moment to reflect on how well things were going. His business was thriving. He had brought on another printer, purchased new equipment, and his office manager, Mary, was doing an excellent job. She had even suggested hiring a part-time graphic design student, which had turned out to be a great decision, significantly enhancing their work. The past weekend, John had gone out with Lynn again, and they had spent another night together. He noticed that Barbara had seemed slightly distant for a couple of days afterward, but had returned to her usual self by Tuesday. Meanwhile, Amanda was making rapid progress, expanding her vocabulary and proudly mastering her toilet training, much to the delight of her grandparents. Barbara left the house before 9 a.m., and John spent the day with Amanda, reading her favorite books until she drifted off for a nap. While she slept, he used the time to catch up on office work. Later, after taking Amanda for a walk, he noticed Barbara's car was back. At 4:30, Mrs. Pierce arrived to babysit Amanda. After ensuring she had everything she needed, John headed upstairs to get ready for his dinner with Barbara. By 5:30, John was downstairs when Barbara appeared. Mrs. Pierce gasped in surprise, exclaiming, "Oh my gosh, Barbara, just look at you!" John turned and immediately understood the reaction. Her usual ponytail was gone, replaced with a stylish, highlighted haircut. She wore subtle makeup, and it was evident she had also gotten a manicure. Dressed in a black, knee-length spaghetti strap dress and carrying a matching purse, she looked stunning. "Barbara, you look incredible," John said. "You've gone from looking 17 to 21 since this morning." Grinning widely, Barbara replied, "Thanks, John. I finally used your gift certificate. It was time for a change, and this made it possible." Mrs. Pierce turned Barbara around to show John the full effect of her transformation. "Barbara, you've really blossomed from a girl into a woman," she commented. Blushing, but still smiling, Barbara took John's arm and asked, "Well, Mrs. Pierce, do we look like a couple?" "You sure do," Mrs. Pierce responded enthusiastically. "We need a picture." John grabbed his camera, and Mrs. Pierce snapped several photos of them together. Soon, it was time to go. John helped Barbara into the car, and as they drove off, he asked, "So, where are we headed?" "I booked a table at the Chiron dining room," Barbara revealed. "I figured it must be good since you took Lynn there." "You seem to know Mrs. Pierce pretty well," John observed. Barbara nodded. "She stops by sometimes when you're at work." "We chat a lot. She's really nice," she explained. At the restaurant, they were seated quickly. John couldn't help but marvel at how much Barbara had matured, not just in her looks, but in her confidence as well. Shortly after they settled in, the waitress came to take their drink orders and mistakenly assumed Barbara was John's wife. Smiling, Barbara ordered a Coke, and John chuckled at the mix-up. Their dinner was fantastic, and their conversation was deeper than usual. They even decided to share a dessert. By the time they had finished eating, the live band had begun to play. John noticed Barbara watching the dancers with interest and asked if she wanted to join them. "I'd love to," Barbara said, adding that her father had taught her how to slow dance. They danced to 3 songs before the music tempo increased. Barbara moved gracefully and confidently, making John appreciate their time on the dance floor even more. Throughout the evening, they danced 5 additional slow songs, thoroughly enjoying themselves. Afterward, as they returned to the car, Barbara looked radiant, and John couldn't stop smiling. When they pulled into the garage, Barbara turned to him and said, "There's one last thing I want to give you for your birthday." She leaned over and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. Though brief, it left John momentarily speechless. Barbara then stepped out of the car, and John quickly hurried around to help her inside. Back home, they sat with Mrs. Pierce, chatting over coffee about their evening. After she left, John took Barbara's hands and sincerely thanked her for such a wonderful night, telling her it had been the best birthday he'd had in years. As they headed upstairs, John paused at his bedroom door. Barbara gave a small wave and said, "Good night." "Good night, Barbara," John replied as she stepped into her room. Though he went to bed, John found himself lying awake for another hour, replaying the evening in his mind. On Tuesday, December 31st at 7 p.m., John was waiting for Barbara to finish getting ready for their New Year's Eve celebration. They were going out with her parents. Fred and June had returned home on the 15th, and the group had been spending a lot of time together. During the Christmas season, 4 adults planned to attend a New Year's Eve celebration at the ballroom of the Chiron Hotel, leaving Mrs. Pierce in charge of babysitting Amanda. Barbara had taken on the role of the designated driver, allowing John to pour himself a modest glass of scotch while waiting. As he sipped his drink, he reflected on the past couple of weeks. Fred and June were astonished at how much Barbara had changed during their travels. Her fresh hairstyle and newfound confidence made her seem like an entirely different person. John had been preoccupied with his growing business and was eager for a slower pace in the coming year. Wanting his employees to enjoy extra time off, he had reduced their working hours between Christmas and New Year's. The holiday had been a joyous occasion spent with Barbara's parents, filled with cheerful moments, including the amusing instances when June and Barbara repeatedly caught John standing under the mistletoe. Fred and June decided to celebrate New Year's Eve by attending a party and managed to secure 4 tickets, insisting that John and Barbara accompany them. At precisely 8 o'clock, after Mrs. Pierce arrived to look after Amanda, John and Barbara departed to pick up her parents. At the event, they encountered another couple, Pat and Sylvia, who were John's friends. The 3 pairs spent the night dancing, conversing, and enjoying themselves. Barbara, in particular, relished the experience of being part of the adult gathering, taking turns on the dance floor with John, her father, or Pat. As midnight drew near, Barbara ensured that John was by her side when the countdown started. While they danced, she leaned in and softly murmured, "This has been the best year of my life." John responded with a smile. "This year started out terribly for me, but it's certainly ending on a better note. Having you in my home has been wonderful. Amanda adores you like a mother." Barbara warmly replied, "That's so kind, John. I couldn't love her more if she were my own." As the final seconds of the year ticked away and the crowd erupted into celebration, Amanda excitedly gave Barbara a brief kiss and said, "Happy New Year!" "Happy New Year," Barbara echoed in return. Moments later, Fred and June approached to exchange their well wishes for the year ahead. Soon after, Fred led Barbara onto the dance floor once more. While they danced, he gently remarked, "Your mother and I have noticed how fond you seem of John. Just keep in mind that he's been through a lot because of your sister. Be careful with his feelings and don't rush into anything. You're still young." Barbara reassured him, "I would never do anything to hurt John, Daddy. I really care about him, but I promise I won't say anything until I turn 18. They left the party shortly afterward, with Barbara taking the wheel. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she reflected on her father's words. She understood that he was right, but that didn't make the waiting any easier. It took her quite a while to finally drift off to sleep. On Saturday, March 15th, a bright and warm day, Barbara went out to do some grocery shopping while Mrs. Pierce paid a visit to John and Amanda. During her visit, Mrs. Pierce offered to take Amanda out for a walk, and John assisted in getting Amanda ready, knowing that before long, Mrs. Pierce would end up carrying her. After finishing his coffee, John stepped outside to check if they were returning. He noticed that Lynn Cameron had met up with them and was snapping pictures. Lynn called out, "I can't stay long. I have a house showing nearby. I saw Amanda and thought I'd take a few pictures for Amy. I'll give you a call later in the week." Her final snapshot captured Amanda and Mrs. Pierce standing hand in hand on the sidewalk, with John watching them from the doorway. As Lynn drove away, they all waved goodbye. On Saturday, May 17th, John prepared for a night out with Lynn at a bar they had discovered a few months prior. They both enjoyed the venue for its upbeat music and lively crowd. That same evening, Barbara also had plans for a date, and Mrs. Pierce was set to babysit. John had noticed that since the start of the year, Barbara had been dating more frequently, seemingly seeing different young men every weekend. He was relieved that she wasn't involved in anything serious, as he had felt a twinge of jealousy when she first began going on dates. Since their New Year's Eve party and the dinner with her parents at the Sharon, John had started to see Barbara in a new light, recognizing her as a young woman rather than a girl. He even found himself wondering if she might have a crush on him. Although she was too young for him, the attention she gave him had provided a boost to his confidence after Amy's departure. However, in recent weeks, Barbara had been a little more distant, and John hoped it wasn't a sign that she was losing interest in her role as Amanda's nanny. As John was heading out for his date, he encountered Barbara's date at the door. An average-looking teenage boy who seemed slightly flustered when John advised him not to keep Barbara out too late. After picking up Lynn, John spent an enjoyable evening dancing and talking with her before they returned to her apartment for coffee. While waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, John kissed Lynn, and before long, they had moved into the living room, where they ended up making love. Afterward, Lynn admitted that she had met someone new, Mark Arnold, and wanted to pursue a serious relationship with him. John agreed that their relationship had always been more physical than emotional, and they both acknowledged that it was time to move on. The following morning, on Sunday, May 18th, John was enjoying a cup of coffee when Barbara, fresh from her workout, joined him at the table. She casually asked about his date, and John shared that Lynn had met someone else, meaning they would no longer be seeing each other. Barbara appeared visibly pleased that Lynn hadn't hurt John the way Amy had. After finishing her juice, she headed upstairs, looking rather satisfied, while John remained seated, watching her as she went. On Saturday, June 21st, Barbara graduated from high school with her parents, John and Amanda, in attendance for the ceremony. She was overjoyed when she received an unexpected award, ranking as the third best student in her graduating class. She attributed her success in mathematics to John's guidance and made it a point to capture moments with him and Amanda as they posed for photographs. John gradually began to view Barbara in a different light, no longer just a schoolgirl, but a young woman. He found himself wondering if she would continue residing in his home while pursuing her university studies. As he reflected on his life, John acknowledged how drastically things had shifted since his separation from Amy. He hoped that Barbara would remain a significant part of his future, rather than becoming a memory he would nostalgically dwell upon during late-night drinks. On Sunday, August 17th, Barbara celebrated her 18th birthday while traveling through Minnesota with her parents, leaving John and Amanda behind. Before departing, Barbara was particularly worried about Amanda's well-being, but John made arrangements for Mrs. Pierce to take on babysitting duties. Within just 2 days, both John and Amanda deeply felt Barbara's absence. Amanda, in particular, was fussy and adamant that only Barbara could tend to her needs. However, with Mrs. Pierce's help, she eventually settled down, allowing John to concentrate on his expanding business, which had recently landed a significant contract, keeping his employees occupied and adding to his own responsibilities. Before Barbara left for university, John gifted her a laptop and a bouquet of roses, gestures she greatly appreciated. As the days passed, John found himself missing their morning workout routines together, though he continued them on his own, noticing the positive changes in his physique. On Thursday, John invited Lynn over for coffee, during which she snapped a few pictures of a man before they conversed on the patio. Lynn shared updates about her relationship with Mark, mentioning that while things were going well, Mark still harbored insecurities about her past with John. They agreed that John would send monthly photographs of Amanda until Mark became more at ease. Their discussion also touched on Amy, from whom Lynn had been hearing less frequently. Amy had hinted at feeling deceived by Peter, but had provided no specific details. John sensed that Amy's influence over him was waning, with his focus now fully on Amanda and his business. On October 8th, Barbara returned home from university to find John waiting to catch up over coffee. She eagerly shared an online discovery, an article from a Parisian newspaper, featuring a photograph of Amy alongside her husband and assistant, standing next to a painting titled Amanda and Her Nanny. The artwork depicted Amanda with Mrs. Pierce, while a shadowy figure resembling John lingered in the background. Another figure, a woman dressed in black, was turned away from the viewer. Barbara was perplexed by the painting, but John speculated that the woman in black represented Amy, and that the artwork conveyed emotions of sorrow or regret. They concluded that Amy had likely altered a photograph, replacing Barbara with Mrs. Pierce as Amanda's caregiver. John printed copies of the painting, intending to give one to Mrs. Pierce before he and Barbara enjoyed coffee together. As they talked, Barbara shared her experiences at university, admitting that the initial transition had been overwhelming, but that she was now more comfortable and looking forward to more engaging coursework in the upcoming semester. John reassured her, expressing confidence in her abilities. On Saturday, November 15th, Barbara requested that John keep his birthday evening free, as she had arranged a special outing for him. She had made dinner reservations at the Chiron, the same restaurant where they had celebrated his previous birthday, and John eagerly anticipated the evening. At 5 p.m., Mrs. Pierce arrived to care for Amanda, while John dressed in his new suit, feeling pleased with his physique after shedding nearly 20 pounds. When he descended the stairs, he was taken aback by Barbara's beauty in her emerald satin dress and complimented her on her new hairstyle. As they left for dinner, she took his hand, and their connection felt effortless. During the drive, they discussed her university courses. At the Chiran, they enjoyed a relaxed meal in a secluded alcove. John observed other men casting admiring glances at Barbara and asked if she had noticed. She laughed, remarking that women were always aware of such things. After dinner, they moved to the dance floor, swaying closely to slow melodies. Barbara pressed against John in an unfamiliar yet intimate way, and he struggled to mask his reaction. Despite this, they continued to enjoy the music. As midnight approached, they decided to head home, walking hand in hand. During the drive, Barbara unfastened her seatbelt and nestled against John, much like her parents used to do. Upon arriving home, Barbara leaned in for a deep, passionate kiss, unlike the brief ones they had shared in the past. Inside, John thanked her for the memorable evening, but she hinted that the night was far from over, leading him upstairs. She made her intentions clear, expressing her desire to take their relationship to the next level. John hesitated, concerned about their age gap and how her parents might react. But Barbara reassured him, stating that she was old enough to make her own choices. They confessed their emotions to one another, Barbara admitting her love, and John revealing that he had been developing feelings for her over time. They shared an intimate night together. The following morning, they woke up side by side, took a shower together, and prepared breakfast before Amanda joined them. On Saturday, April the 24th, John enjoyed a leisurely spring afternoon watching a hockey game after spending the morning handling bookkeeping at the office. His days were typically packed with overseeing payroll and accounting for his 7 employees. He often worked evenings so he could care for Amanda during the day, while Barbara tended to her in the evenings, sometimes with assistance from Vicky Pierce. It was difficult to believe that nearly 2 years had passed since his divorce from Amy, and so much had transformed in that time. As John focused on the game, the doorbell rang. Expecting a salesperson, he was surprised to see Lynn standing there. She explained that she had been engaged and away on a cruise, which was why she hadn't returned his calls. However, her visit wasn't about her engagement. It was about Amy. She had returned to town and wanted to see both him and Amanda. After contemplating the situation, John agreed. Lynn brought Amy inside, and John immediately noticed the changes in her appearance. She was slimmer, with shorter hair. After some casual conversation, Amy admitted that leaving John had been the worst mistake of her life. She had learned that Peter, the man she had left John for, had deceived her. He had been married twice before, and his past behavior repeated itself, causing Amy deep emotional pain. As she shared her regrets, the door suddenly opened, and Amanda ran into the room, excited about getting ice cream. John introduced Amanda to Amy, who, overcome with emotion, began to cry as they shared a brief embrace. At that moment, Barbara entered the room, shocking Amy, who hadn't expected to see her younger sister, now grown up. Without hesitation, Barbara explained that she had been living with John and Amanda, acting as Amanda's nanny while their parents traveled. The situation took another unexpected turn when John revealed that Barbara had legally adopted Amanda, and that he and Barbara had gotten married during a trip to Las Vegas. Stunned, Amy left in disbelief, with Lynn following to console her. After helping Amy into the car, Lynn returned to the house concerned about Amy's emotional state. John assured her that they would support Amy in getting back on her feet. As Amy departed, visibly distraught, John and Barbara stood together while Amanda, curious, asked why her first mother was crying. With gentle reassurance, Barbara explained that Amy was simply very sad.